Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is the Institute Saga 4 in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 6, Alert. I'm here, Clark declared as he decelerated to a stop beside General Zod. Looking round at the central command nexus of the Solar Defense Fleet, he noted that the normal semi-relaxed tempo had sped up quite considerably. What's happened? Zod glanced at him, then used his rank circlet to send a mental command that caused the hologram of the solar system to change from its normal state to one far less cluttered. A glowing string of dots stretched from the edge of the hologram to Earth, round it several times and then back the way it came. What is that? A problem, Zod growled. A big problem. That is a Kryptonian stealth drive trace. The stealth drive is not very efficient, slow, and lacks agility, but it shields the craft it is mounted in from any form of detection and can be adjusted to open small holes in the shielding effect to allow for active scans. However, the drive leaves a slight resonance in the informational underlayer of the multiverse that allows its route to be plotted after 3 days, but the trace vanishes within 10. A Kryptonian stealth drive, Clark repeated. But, who? We don't know, Zod growled. My gut says it's the Kree, but we cannot rule out the Skrull or the Shi'ar. All of them have managed to acquire Kryptonian technology in the past, so any of them could be the ones who did this. And whoever did it has managed to perform a full recon of Earth without us knowing. Clark grimaced. Please tell me that there's a maximum size that this stealth drive can conceal. There is, Zod confirmed. The Golden Feather is 3 times the maximum size that the field can enclose, and anything that uses advanced weaponry would generate too much energy for the shroud to conceal. The Kryptonian Defense Fleet used to deploy recon drones that utilized that technology, allowing us to gain advanced warning of enemy craft without them detecting us in turn. My guess would be a recon fighter launched from outside the system to perform a sweep before returning to its mothership. The Kree often used such a tactic, although the Shi'ar might have adopted that technique too. The Skrull prefer to use recon in force. We would know if it was them, unless something has happened that has changed their strategic preferences. Zod trailed off thoughtfully and Clark sighed. I see. I know you dislike politicians. Should I be the one to alert the United Nations? That would be for the best, Kal. Ho. Lee. Shit. Bobby Drake gasped as the headline alien probe detected, invasion imminent? Scrolled across the bottom of the screen on which Clark was giving a speech to the assembled delegates of the United Nations. An instant later, a hand slapped the back of his head. Ow. Don't swear. Jubilation, Lee snapped as she lowered her hand, ignoring the puppy dog eyes he sent her way. Come on, Bobby pleaded. I mean, alien invasion? They'll be mobilizing everyone. We'll finally be able to show how awesome we are. Some of us proved it at the Battle of the Cure, remember? Chris shot back from where he was sat on a chair, brushing Lara's hair as she sat on the floor, leaning against his knees as she all but purred in contentment. I'm not sure if we'll get to do anything, though. I can still only hold my breath for 30 minutes, so I'm limited to near-Earth operations unless I get a suit, and there's over 50 fully empowered Kryptonians available to smash up any invaders, not to mention all the alternate reality hero teams that Dad's arranged mutual reinforcement pacts with, and then there's Mr. Black. Mr. Black scary, Lara confirmed, causing almost half of the occupants of the room to stare at her in shock. Hench Girl helped Lara by doing something to reinforce her bones without stopping her being able to grow. Chris explained, continuing his chosen chore. Bones now strong as father's, Lara confirmed, idly popping a claw and looking at her reflection in the adamantium blade. Still lighter, means move faster. So, we're not gonna get into it unless things go bad. Rogue mused, one hand stroking her bracelet. I hope that don't happen. I agree, Martha Kent said as she and May Parker entered the room, pushing trolleys piled high with sandwiches and various soft drinks. May and I have spent quite a bit of effort on helping you, we'd hate to see it go to waste. The comment caused the building tension in the room to dissipate in laughter. More aliens, Magneto swore as he watched Superman speaking on the main screen. As if the presence of the Kryptonians and the New Olympians wasn't enough, we now have to deal with 3 different alien empires. My lord, Chrome offered diffidently, in the face of this revelation, I have to ask, how can mutant kind survive against such odds without the humans and their allies? Magneto opened his mouth to snap at his chief acolyte, then he frowned in thought. Interesting. Doom mused as he watched the feed that was being transmitted through the gate. It would seem that my country's relocation was just in time. North Korea is now under your lieutenant's command, father, and the people are beginning the basic infrastructure projects required to link the two lands for unification. Cynthia said as she flew to land in front of her father's throne. What do you wish to do with Kim Jong-un? Keep him in stasis for now. Doom said almost absently. Once I have raised the living standard in the land he once ruled and placed its people into my protective hand, I shall personally release him so he may see what he might have achieved were he not so focused on his own pleasures. Yes, father. I wonder how my old friend will react to this. Charles mused as the holographic screen floated in front of him. No clue, Chuck. Wolverine shrugged. Judging from what we know, he'll either hide away, or try to do something big. If he does, he will try not to interfere with those defending the Earth. Charles stated. To risk seeing everything he wishes to achieve destroyed is not his way. Kryptonite and the gem of Sidorak. Logan pointed out and Charles winced slightly. My old friend has been known to miscalculate on occasion, though. Damn it. Bolivar Trask cursed. Just as we'd reached the levels required for Phase 1, Murphy's Law decides to wake up and kick us in the teeth. It is irritating. Dr. Armanzola agreed, glancing up from the laptop he was running a set of simulations on. Vemond me to tell you about Z.E. Kopitan and how he caused Z.E. Red Skullgva problems. The plan will be initiated after the current crisis is resolved. Master Mold decreed from the back of the factory. At that point, those who would seek to stop us from following our primary directives will still be recovering, making their ability to resist significantly lower. In addition, the delay will allow for the construction of additional Silver Sentinels and the preparation of additional Bio Sentinels. And that is VHYURZE Vun in charge. Zola said admiringly, his skin briefly shifting to a metallic hue before resetting. Cyclops. Superman said in greeting as the mutant entered the main hall of the watchtower. Superman. Scott replied. Clark asked me to pass the word to you and your brother. Our Earth just got scanned by a steel-fed starship. Might have been a probe, might have been a fighter. We don't know for sure. Either way, you may want to warn the others that Reality Alpha might be calling for aid if things go bad. I shall see to it personally. Clark Wayne promised, then he grinned. By the way, can I offer you some food as you tell me how my counterpart is doing with his new team? Scott grinned as he and Clark started to walk towards one of the cafeterias on the station, the heroes of Reality 49's Justice League flowing round them on missions of their own. Well, he's proving to be a really good leader, although that doesn't really come as a surprise. Feyre watched from the bridge of Station Prime, the first construction/maintenance orbital headquarters of the Solar Defense Fleet, as a dozen starships slowly separated from their docking clamps, moving on low-powered reality thrusters as they rotated to face their assigned courses. The energy auras of their primary engines began to gather strength as they moved outwards on their patrol. Ironic. She mused quietly. A dozen ships, each a copy of the Golden Feather, and not a single Kryptonian amongst their crews. But our numbers are growing, thanks to KALL. Azlan said from behind her, forcing Feyre to suppress her twitch of shock. After a moment to check that she was in full control of her expression, she turned to face her flag lieutenant. They are. She agreed, her face briefly softening as she remembered being the guest of honor at the decanting of the 50th new Kryptonian child. And with the longevity that the sun grants us, we shall live long enough to witness our people rise once more. And this time, we shall listen to those who try to warn us. May Ra bless our path. Azlan responded almost reflexively, then he shook his head slightly to refocus, a habit he had picked up from his human girlfriend. Sorry. Fighter Command has reported in, no trace of any stealth drive traces currently detectable around New Krypton. Unless whoever it was has launched a second wave. Unlikely. Feyre mused. Remember, Earth and New Krypton are on opposite sides of the Sun, but in the same orbit. The gates allow us to move from one world to the other in a single pace, so for us the distance is not an issue, but outsiders would probably not know of the gates. The angle they approached Earth means that New Krypton was hidden from them, and given how few systems have even one habitable planet, proportionally speaking, why should they continue to search when they have already located that which they sought? Unlike the few cases where there are multiple planets, we don't need to use chains of repeater satellites to transmit information between worlds, thus there is no obvious clue that a second inhabited planet is here. So, Earth is their primary target, whoever they are. Azlan said, looking worried. My fiancé's relatives are still debating whether or not to move to New Krypton. Fiancé? Feyre asked, distracted by the news he had let slip. When did you propose? 3 days ago. Azlan replied with a goofy grin. She said yes, and we're hoping to adopt both human and Kryptonian children. I hope you intend to give me an invitation to the wedding. Feyre said with a quick smile before turning her attention back to the starships that were accelerating away at almost 50 gravities. However, it'll have to wait until we have confirmation on what we are facing. I'm here. Clark declared as he decelerated to a stop beside General Zod. What is it? The Isaac Asimov has detected what we believe to be the intruder, a single ship. Zod said, his gaze fixed on the holographic display that was showing only a small portion of the solar system with a pulsing icon marking the position of the unidentified craft. The fact that there is only one ship rules out the Skrull. They dispatch fleets of at least a dozen, if not more, seeking to overwhelm their enemies with numbers. The Kree tend to use smaller groups, but they deploy flankers and scouts to extend their sensor reach. Even with the improvements the humans came up with to extend the range of our fleet's sensors, their outliers would have detected the Asimov had it been Kree. By a process of elimination, the only space-going group capable of building something so large and willing to deploy it on its own would be the Shi'ar, which is surprising given that their expansion was headed in the opposite direction. Clark nodded to show that he understood and followed his godfather's knowledge, then the icon shimmered and changed to one that Clark hadn't seen before. Beside him, Zod stiffened, his face paling. Governor General. Clark asked after a long moment. What does that mean? That Earth is doomed. Zod whispered. That, Clark, is the symbol for a Kryptonian Class 8 combat attachment, a planet killer. We have nothing that can stand up to it, and it'll be here within a day. Chapter 7, Preparations. This is Captain Allen of the Asimov. The woman on the holodisplay stated. We have the incoming vessel on our sensors and can confirm an 83% match with the statistics for a Class 8 combat attachment, but the energy readings are off. Zod turned round from where he was perusing files on the Class 8 attachments. Off? What do you mean, off? We're not picking up any of the energy emissions of the more powerful weapons systems. Allen responded. The point defense systems read as being on standby, as well as all of the tertiary weapons arrays. The secondary arrays read as not only being in power down mode, but there are barely a quarter of the numbers that there should be, while the primaries are either totally powered down, or not there. What? Zod asked rhetorically. Why in Rao's name would the Shi'ar strip out the primary weapons array of a Class 8? It isn't the Shi'ar. It can't be, but it has to be. Has to be who? Clark asked as the rest of his team watched Zod worriedly. Probe information analyzed. Location of final Kryptonian designated KALL confirmed. Alert. Additional Kryptonians indicated. Analysis of records indicates Argosian origin. Analysis indicates presence of 7 additional Argosians with error of +/3. Primary contact protocol plan efficiency projection 32% +/17% due to non-calculable conditions. Accessing databanks for alternate contact protocol programs. Brainiac. Charles Xavier asked and Zod nodded, glancing round at the intent faces of the assembled team leaders. Brainiac. Zod confirmed, his voice filled with cold hatred. The sentient computer system that was created to preserve Krypton, but instead lied about the threat Krypton faced and abandoned its duty. Its actions condemned Krypton, led to our exile, and destroyed Kandor. Feyre supplied from beside Zod. We were planning to eventually hunt it down once we had built a strong enough fleet, but for Brainiac to come here, why? There might be something here that it wants. Xanatos stated, stroking his goatee as he considered the possibilities. Something it knows of, something it tracked here. Xanatos trailed off as Clark flinched, causing everyone to look at him. Me. He stated. I am the last son of Krypton. I was sent by Jor-El as Krypton exploded, the same time that Brainiac escaped. Brainiac would have spotted the transport pod that brought me here. Why it didn't come earlier, though? The number of stars on the vector you were sent on would have been considerable. Reed Richards supplied. Since Brainiac is a computer, no matter how advanced, it would have scanned every star system on the way in order to ensure that it didn't miss you. Assuming that its basic functions are similar to most of the AIs that I've encountered, anyway. Jarvis, Herbie, we have several AIs of our own. Tony Stark commented. When I get back to the Avengers Tower, I'm going to activate Jarvis' advanced hacking countermeasures. Reed, if you need help getting Herbie's hack resistance up, give me a call. Going up against an AI of unknown capabilities. Reed mused. Of course, Herbie has quite a few Kryptonian upgrades thanks to Kara. Zed, I'll probably be sending young Harry to New Krypton until this is over. Tony added. Pepper as well, I don't want to risk either of them. Moving the non-combatants out of the way is a good idea. Zed allowed. There are many empty buildings in New Kryptonopolis which they can use. Our construction program was over-enthusiastic about building New Krypton's capital. So, we move all the non-combatants linked to super teams to New Krypton to avoid Brainiac targeting them in an attempt to demoralize us. Clark stated. We have neither the time nor the resources for a large-scale evacuation. Trying to dome the cities and fly them to New Krypton would leave them extremely vulnerable to hostile fire. Even if we could install the technology in time. Zed agreed soberly. Plus, Brainiac has some way of destroying a domed city with a single blast. It did it to Kandor, and killed my wife. Doming the cities is not a wise move, even if we did have the time. I don't see any real choice. Clark sighed. I'm going to activate the Omega protocols. A susurration of protest rose around the table and Clark held up his hand to quieten them. Brainiac took out an entire city before it seized a Class 8 combat attachment. That thing is the equivalent of the Death Star, without the exhaust port to fire a missile down. We are going to need as many combat-capable individuals as possible, especially those who can operate in space. But, to team up with villains. Falcon protested. I think they'll see reason. Clark riposted. Hard to steal when your entire planet is a cloud of plasma. However, we need to keep this as quiet as possible. It's quite probable that Brainiac is monitoring Earth's communications even as we speak. Unlikely, but not impossible. Zed mused. It is still out of range of radio communications, but then again, we Kryptonians had all but abandoned that form of data transfer for centuries. However, we cannot know what technology Brainiac has incorporated into itself during the decades it has traveled. A chime interrupted the meeting and Clark raised his hand to signify that he was listening to the microcommunicator nestled in his ear canal. A moment later, his eyebrows shot up. Brainiac is hailing us, and is asking for me. Primary hailing sequence completed. Estimated time for return response, 27 minutes. Possible contact at 53 Mark 18. Contact lost. 93.15% chance of data interpretation error. 5.26% chance contact is natural space object. 1.47% chance contact is stealthed spacecraft. 0.12% chance of sensor miscalibration. Additional sensor sweeps recommended. Activating point defense. All other weapons remaining in standby. Shit. Captain Allen swore as the readings changed. We got too close and now it suspects something. Open the range and send a directional pulse to the others warning them that the sensor range is 25% more than previously suspected. Yes, Captain. And send a pulse to Earth too. They need to know. If it's upgraded one system, most of the others are probably upgraded too. Yes, Captain. Greetings, sentient beings of Sol 3, known also as Earth. The synthesized voice sounded over the loudspeakers. My designation is Brainiac, Benign Research Artificial Intelligence Neural Integrated Advanced Computer. My primary mission is to seek any information you may possess on the one known as KAL of House L, formerly of the planet Krypton. Additional data trading is acceptable, especially technology data. I request permission to enter orbit of Sol 3 in order to facilitate communications. Worrying. Connor mused. The implication is that this Brainiac has traded with other worlds, so it is highly unlikely that it is limited to Kryptonian technology. It's on a perfect trajectory for a minimum energy expenditure orbital insertion. T'Challa relayed from the Wakandan analysts. Solar Defense Fleet reports that a quarter of its point defense systems are online. Betsy Braddock called from her own console. They estimate its sensors are a quarter again more effective than baseline Kryptonian sensors. Orbital insertion estimated in 6 hours. T'Challa added. Clark frowned, then switched on his microphone. Attention Brainiac. This is Kall, son of Jor-El. Please state your intentions now that you have located me. Over. Clark listened to the recording, then pressed the icon to transmit it. Well, let's see what it does. SDF will be fully deployed 1 hour after Brainiac's orbital insertion. Connor stated. Stealth systems seem to be holding. How on earth does stealth work in space? Isaiah Bradley asked. I mean, there's heat, light reflection, blocking of stars and all that. Our ships use holographic shields to prevent occlusion while waste heat is directed away from any known craft in order to reduce detection. Clark said. They have other techniques, some of which are the result of humans playing around with the technology of my people, but even Kryptonian sensors have great difficulty picking up a fully stealthed SDF vessel at anything greater than half range, even when they know exactly where to look. Message from Xavier. Betsy relayed. The Institute has been evacuated and Bayville is being evacuated to New Krypton as well. Greetings, Clark. Dr. Doom declaimed as he strode into the main hall. I come to place my skills in your service. Although Great Latveria is no longer at risk from beings such as this Brainiac, I still have many plans I wish to see fulfilled, plans which would need considerable and very irritating modifications should anything happen to Earth. I'm honored that you decided to join us. Clark said, then he frowned. Lord Doom, how many of the villains on Earth can you contact? The Omega Protocols. Doom said approvingly. Fear not, for Doom shall spread the word to all those who need to know. The javelin rose above the moon-base domes and on board, Connor von Doom looked at the other 2 occupants of the craft. Honor Father, although I am pleased to be the one of the 2 chosen to guard your back for this, I must ask why me and not T'Challa. If I may. Kevin Sidney asked and Clark nodded. Part of it is that you are stronger and tougher than Black Panther. While he is mystically enhanced, your physical prowess and ability to resist damage is still greater. And you are a task force in your own right. Connor replied. And Sidera let me copy her. Kevin added. She's standing by with our primary backup, 30 of General Zed's finest. All I need to do is flicker a portal in front of her and she'll be able to follow it back to us as we hold the beachhead while the others begin their own mobilizations. Got it. Connor said as ahead of them, a tiny dot of light began to expand. Is that Brainiac? It is. Clark said quietly. Brainiac, this is Kall approaching your position from the moon. I have you in sight, requesting permission to dock and come aboard with my 2 colleagues. Permission granted, Kall. The reply came a few seconds later. Welcome. Why is my paranoia increasing? Connor asked, earning a smirk from Morph. Incoming craft displaying both Kryptonian tech and secondary tech of lesser development. Secondary tech designated Earth tech. Activating full planetary datanet interception protocols. 1,956,872 requests for data trades noted. Reallocating computational cores 19 through 28 to diversionary data trading. Deploying field generation nodes. As the Javelin curved towards the open landing bay, Clark spotted several dozen spheres racing away from the giant ship. Brainiac, this is Kall. I have spotted unknown objects moving away from you at high speed. Have you suffered an engineering issue? Negative. To aid in communications, relay satellites are being deployed. I don't trust it. Connor growled. Interesting. Doom said as he watched the holographic display. Those look like communication satellites at first glance, but the external arrays are slightly wrong for data transfer. Someone get me a sensor scan of one of those satellites. Incoming craft has powered down engines and the occupants are debarking. Scans confirm that crew member 1 is KALL. Scans indicate crew member 2 is male child of KALL. Scans inconclusive on crew member 3. Quite a ship. Morph said, looking round at the crystalline pillars of the Kryptonian vessel's bay and the various pipes, conduits, and nodes spread across the walls and deckhead, portions of them glowing purple. Welcome aboard, KALL, son of Jor-El. Brainiac said. Welcome aboard, scion of House El. Welcome aboard, ally of House El. I think you're the scion. Morph whispered to Connor. I got that, thanks. Connor hissed back as a hatch at the back of the bay hissed open. Please make your way to the central chamber. Brainiac said and Clark nodded as he led the way. You know, Connor remarked as they walked down the long corridor, I'm seeing at least 5 different types of tech here. Really? Morph asked. I only see 3. 5. Look at the shapes of the conduits, especially the fastenings. Connor replied. Although form has to follow function to a certain degree if the technology is to work efficiently, there are many different ways to style things. There are bolts with clockwise ridges while others are anti-clockwise. Some of the status lights are round, some rectangular and others are holographic. The nodes come in several different shapes, round, square, hexagonal, and the metals they are made from differ in color and texture. So, how many different types do you think there are? 5 at the very least, probably 8. There are 10 different origins of technology represented in the corridor you are currently traversing. Connor blinked, then frowned as he looked more closely at the systems adorning the walls. Odd, wait. Yep, that's 9 and that may be the 10th. Dr. Doom trained you well, didn't he? Before Connor could reply, they exited the corridor into a huge chamber. Above them, over a dozen glowing spheres floated, encased in filigree cages. In the center of the chamber was a throne-like chair in which a metallic humanoid figure was seated, cables connecting its head and torso to the backrest. Greetings, KALL. I am Brainiac, guardian of the legacy of Krypton. My research indicates your companions are the heroes known as Guardsman and Morph. They are. Clark replied. Quite an impressive ship you have here, but I have to ask, what's with the lights? I've never seen anything like them before. Each light is the repository of the data from an entire world that I have collected in my journey here. Brainiac said as the cables attached to him disengaged and retracted, allowing him to stand up. I collected them utilizing a variation of the technique that allowed me to store the data of the city of Kandor. Clark froze as his eyes fixed on the display module integrated into the back of the throne. Encased in a shimmering force field was what appeared at first glance to be a model city, but his vision let him zoom in on it, showing him the inhabitants frozen motionless, many of them caught as they flinched away from whatever had happened to them. Honor father. Connor hissed and Clark nodded. I see it. That is Kandor. Chapter 8, Brainiac. I see it. That is Kandor. Brainiac stiffened in shock. Query. How is it that you know of Kandor? All indications are that you did not. New data located in planetary datanet. It is within this solar system. The probability of this outcome was exceedingly low. Recalculating plans, new priority, locate all Kryptonians and place into stasis. Morph. Now. Clark shouted as he accelerated forwards, slamming into the avatar of Brainiac even as hatches began to open around the edges of the chamber, energy guns emerging from the darkness within. Connor had started to move at the same instant as his father, pulling a small gun out from inside his tunic and opening fire on the wall-mounted weapons. You cannot stand against me. Brainiac declared even as Clark punched a hole straight through its torso. This is but one body at my unexpected situation alert. Switching to lethal mode. Brainiac. Die. Zed roared as he lunged past Clark, grabbing Brainiac's robotic avatar and ripping it into pieces before an energy blast impacted on him, sending him into a wall. Clark grabbed a piece of debris and hurled it at the gun in question, reducing it to scrap metal. The relay drones are in position. Brainiac's voice echoed above the sounds of destruction. Field now established and at 5%. Preparing for digitization of planet Earth and its inhabitants. Where's Brainiac's core? Clark shouted as he ripped another energy blaster from the wall, then threw it at the robot that had just entered. Probably by the power core. Zed shouted back as he used his I-beams to bisect a second robot. I need a squad. Sir, I have candor. Feyre shouted as she heft the force field-enclosed miniature city. Take it to New Krypton. And those planets too. Clark ordered. General, which way? Resistance will not be allowed. Brainiac stated as more skeletal robots entered the battle. I have now modified my primary directives to allow me to utilize lethal force against Kryptonians. Please surrender rather than continue to cause damage that I will have to repair. Field at 10% and rising. Clark joined Zed by one of the rear hatches even as a silvery blur grabbed one of the floating planets and vanished back through the portal. Together they ripped the doors out of the hatchway and hurled them at the incoming robots, reducing them to scattered scrap. Let's go. Zed shouted as he accelerated down the corridor, Clark close behind him as they charged towards Brainiac's seat of consciousness. And if anyone can take down the things projecting the field that's about to turn us all into a glowing nightlight, do it. The voice over the radio half-shrieked. Magneto looked up, then he stretched his senses out. Only one within my range. He growled. I guess it will have to do. Stretching out a hand, he made a fist and, several hundred miles above him, a single satellite crumpled inwards, turning itself into metallic space debris. Galatea Kane gritted her teeth as she flew through yet another of the satellites threatening the Earth. Her husband and adopted daughter were relying on her, and no matter the cost to herself, she would not let them down. She was a hero now, and heroes saved people. Even if she died, it would be to make sure that her daughter would live. This is for you, Polaris. She whispered as she spied another satellite. Targets are generating electronic countermeasures. Unable to get a lock on them. The new Olympian at the weapons console reported. Tell the fighters to use visual targeting and then move us in closer to do the same. Captain Allen commanded. Check with the other ships to find out if they're having the same issues and pass the word to deploy all fighters or we're going to lose our home world. Aye, Captain. Damn it. Marco Kane growled as he looked up at the brief pinprick that marked the destruction of yet another satellite. There has to be something that I can do. Sire. Blink half shouted as she dropped out of a portal. King T'Challa is requesting your presence. Really? Marco asked, then he accepted his helmet from the soldier carrying it for him. Donning it, he triggered the clamps to hold it secure. Then let's move. The silver samurai stared silently skywards, suppressing sighs of sadness. No, I wasn't. Ichiki Hisako dropped her notepad at Harada Kanikiro's deadpan comment. Practicing your alliteration, were you? He asked, picking up the notebook and looking once again at the English sentence before handing it back and looking upwards. It should have been sorrow at seeing serious skirmishes stipulating swords should stay sheathed. Hisako's jaw dropped in shock at how Kanikiro had effortlessly finished her planned sentence. I look forwards to hearing your haiku about this day. He added before vanishing back inside, leaving Hisako to stare once more at the battle above the atmosphere and wish that her ability to generate Shinik armor also let her fly. She hated being helpless. Once was more than enough. 3 down. Iron Man shouted as his modified repulsors turned another of the energy field relays into scrap. Where's the next one? Bearing 157 will take you to one that is currently not being targeted, sir. Jarvis replied. Be aware that the field strength is still increasing. No less than 712 more satellites will need to be destroyed to permanently destabilize the field. The other satellites are reconfiguring to cover the gaps being created. Not good. Tony growled as he used his thrusters to head towards his next target. Good thing that Harry's safe on New Krypton. Aye, though my mother would be happy to look after him on Asgard should the need to hide him arise once more. Thor said over their comm as he used Mjolnir to destroy another satellite. Polaris Cane floated high above Genosha, the oxygen mask allowing her to breathe in the rarefied atmosphere. Reaching out with her senses, she located one of the satellites and used her power to twist the insides of it, causing it to explode in a shower of sparks and plasma. "Mom, don't die," she whispered to herself as she searched for another one to destroy. A beam of red energy barely missed Clark, but the Kryptonian following him wasn't so lucky and Clark ripped out the offending emplacement even as the lifeless body of the one who had been hit slammed into the deck. "It should be through that door," Zod shouted as he ripped the other defensive cannon out of its mountings, then he staggered backwards. "Damn it, there's kryptonite in those panels. Then this is a job for the Juggernaut," Marco Kane declared from behind them. Coming through. The armored monarch accelerated past the shocked Kryptonians and slammed into the doors, their incredibly strong construction and reinforcing tech no match for his demonically enhanced mutant power. The doors scythed inwards, smashing into delicate crystal arrays which were then further smashed by the Genoshian King. This event does not compute. Rerouting systems to compensate for systems unable to be rerouted, does not compute, does not. The lights flickered, then went out along with the artificial gravity. "It's done," Zod breathed in shock. "After all these years. Brainiac is no more." Clark closed his eyes for a moment, then grinned. "The fields dissipated. The remaining satellites are being destroyed even as we speak." Zod returned his grin, then his expression turned sober as he looked down the passage and the motionless bodies floating in it. "Yes, we have won, but at what cost, my friend? At what cost?" And so Blink and I jumped to the embassy and through the gate, then she jumped us to Gatekeeper. Marco explained as Clark towed him through Gatekeeper's portal and back into the moon base. "I came through and Morph switched to a telekinetic form in order to boost me to your aid. Second time someone's thrown me to exactly where I was needed." Zod lifted an inquisitive eyebrow at Clark. "I threw him at Magneto's floating base once. And as a result of that, I became a king." Marco laughed before sobering. "General, the 14 who gave their lives to clear the way for me and to protect you, when is their funeral being held? I wish to attend. They were true warriors. They will be granted warriors' funerals," Zod stated. "As we Kryptonians gain our power from the sun, so shall they be sent into it in one final voyage." Marco nodded. "Of course. I'll break the news to Azlan's fiancé," Thora said quietly. "She deserves to know how he died." "She was to marry him?" Zod asked. "Then she will be granted the bereavement pension. Hopefully, his spirit will rest easier knowing that she is provided for." 14 dead, all Kryptonians. Marco sighed. "Damn it, that's over a quarter of all the adult Kryptonians. Let's hope that no one else decides to try anything for a while. The threat is over already." Bolivar Trask asked in shock. "Early reports indicate that almost half of the Kryptonians who participated in the main assault have died," Master Mold stated. "With the numbers of Kryptonians reduced by a quarter, the probability of success has risen considerably. When would be the best time to begin?" Trask asked, his eyes lighting up with eager anticipation. "Psychological situational analysis indicates the optimum time would be in 1.3 days. "Excellent." Trask gloated. "At long last, humanity will be purified. Perhaps we should consider trying to gain control of the craft that this Brainiac used," Dr. Zola added. "The fact that they lost so many Kryptonians trying to capture it indicates that there are many treasures aboard that may help us in the future." "Candor," Dr. Doom repeated as he examined the enclosed city carefully. To one side, Tony Stark, Bruce Banner and Reed Richards were using holoboards to scribble equations and run simulations. "How many Kryptonians are in there?" The last census before Brainiac's intervention was about 16.5 million. Zod said in a quiet voice, his gaze fixed on one microscopic figure. "Including my wife." Ursa Druzid. Doom looked at the Kryptonian general for a long moment. "I know the pain of losing a loved one too," he said, foregoing his usual bombastic style of speaking. "If it is within my power, I shall see the two of you reunited once more." "Victor, we need a fourth opinion here," Reed called. "We think we've found a way to reverse the shrinkage." Zed stared at the trio in desperate hope. "You may wish to prepare a place to put Candor," Doom noted as he turned to join the trio of scientists. "So, show Doom what you have and Doom will demonstrate how to do it better." 16 million. Xavier repeated in a shell-shocked voice. The knowledge of what 50 Kryptonians could do at full power was terrifying enough, but 16 million. "It won't be that bad, not for a while," Clark said reassuringly. "For starters, it took Zed and the others almost a full year to fully power up. Sure, they got many of the powers within the first couple of weeks, but building up the reserves to allow you to use the powers for prolonged periods? That takes months, if not years. I could easily outlast a dozen newly empowered Kryptonians with only minimal injuries. However, we are keeping it quiet for now. Better to present it as a done deal than put up with protests and sabotage as people try to prevent the Kryptonian race from being revived." "I can see your point," Charles agreed. "That reminds me," Clark said thoughtfully. "When they do unshrink Candor, I'll need to borrow Jean for a while, and do you know any other telepaths who can connect with Kryptonian minds?" "I believe that Sage can do so," Charles mused. "As for others, none whom I would trust come to mind." Chapter 9, Funeral. The Golden Feather floated motionless to the stellar north of the Sun, equidistant from both Earth and New Krypton, while its bow pointed at the giant globe that was the system primary. At the front of the open bay, 14 crystal coffins floated above the reprogrammed gravity plates. A small, crystalline drive unit was affixed to the end of each coffin, waiting for the activation command. Behind the coffins stood General Zed and Clark Kent, both in their formal outfits but with their normal colors replaced with black and dark gray. Around the edge of the bay and filling most of the floor space were 200 people, while hovering cameras allowed the inhabitants of both planets to watch. "Ladies and gentle beings, we are here today to honor the sacrifice of the 14. Zed said, his voice projecting clearly due to his, recently learned, oratory skills. "We are here to remember their lives and to salute them as they pass into the light, to live with Rao as his true companions." Zed stopped and Clark took over. "We of two worlds are here to pay tribute to them, their courage, their bravery and their willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice to save uncountable millions of lives. May Rao welcome them as his own." The lights in the bay dimmed, leaving only the spotlights shining on the coffins and the stars outside the atmospheric shield. "From the stars we came, to the stars we return," Zed said, his voice filled with sadness. "We send these warriors to Rao's side, may they watch over us." The drive systems on the coffins began to power up and Zed bent his head. "Azlan of Kryptonopolis, Baaltar of Argos City, Bazwyel of Fulter, Katil of Candor, Faohar of Kryptonopolis, Jackzon of Candor, Ipfaro of Volto Island, Kalon of Rao's Vale, Larfar of Tandor, Norfar of Argos City, Tarfar of Tandar, Shangri of Kryptonopolis, Urjax of Yefar and Zaxexon of Kryptonopolis. They gave of themselves that we may live, and so we honor their sacrifices as we watch them depart on their final voyage." As Zed spoke each name, the coffin carrying the deceased Kryptonian in question slid forwards, through the energy shield and into space. By the end of his speech, the coffins were receding into the distance, their faceted surfaces catching the starlight briefly as they flew in a line on their final journey, carrying their cargo to the Sun. The silence in the bay was almost solid, the only noises being the occasional rustle as several of the attendees wiped away the tears flowing down their cheeks. In the Xavier mansion, Charles closed his eyes as the aura of sadness and mourning pressed against his mental shields. Beside him, Jean Grey clung to Scott as the emotions of the Academy students washed over her. Marco Kane stood at the top of the steps to the Imperial Palace, his daughter in one arm and his wife in the other as the three of them stared up at the sky. Although they couldn't actually see the coffins, with the probable exception of Galatea, they had chosen to stand vigil for the ceremony, a decision that had been applauded and copied by virtually the entire population of Genosha. Polaris snuggled closer to her father, her gaze fixed on the sky and her mind remembering the few of the 14 that she had met during various diplomatic functions. And whom she would never meet again. A tear made its way down her cheek. Although she didn't notice it, the picture of her crying for the fallen would grace the cover of a great many publications the next day. Magneto stood atop the cliff in which his latest base had been built, his helmet tucked into the crook of his elbow as he stared into the night sky. Ironic. He mused to himself, although his acolytes were close enough to hear his every word. My life was saved by a metahuman when I was young, it was that which convinced me that only those with powers could truly be trusted. For a long moment, Magneto remained silent, then he spoke again. Were I still the person I was back then, I would have taken the recent events as proof of my beliefs. But I am not that man, not that boy. The 14 died to save everyone. They gave selflessly in order to protect not just those with powers, those gifted with special abilities, but everyone. All people, human, mutant and Kryptonian. I look at them and I see that my old friend was indeed closer to the truth than I was. It is not what one is that matters, it is what one chooses. I only hope that I have not already burned the bridge that I need to take. The acolytes exchanged glances. While most were confused, several had understood what he was trying to say. But not all of those who understood him agreed with his conclusions. On the Iron Man landing platform on the Avengers Tower, the Avengers and their friends stood silently. Tony Stark was clad not in his armored suit, but in the finest formal suit he owned, Pepper Potts standing next to him wearing a black dress and a veil, their hands intertwined. Steve Rogers was clad in his army uniform as he stood saluting the fallen, Kara Zor-El standing beside him wearing a black version of her normal uniform. Thor stood on the other side of Tony Stark, Mjolnir held high in respect while Jane Foster stood beside him. Behind them stood the other Avengers and their allies. Clint Barton and Natasha Romanoff held young Harry's hands as he looked round in confusion, not understanding why the adults were so sad. Bruce Banner stood slightly to one side while Remus Lupin stood with them, his eyes moving from the sky to Harry and back again as they kept their vigil. Odin stood on the Bifrost beside Heimdall, his gaze fixed on the projected image of the funeral. Arrayed behind him were his wife Frigga, Sif, and the warriors for and the assembled nobles and renowned warriors of Asgard. All of them mourned the fall of the 14 and many regretted that the situation had escalated so fast that they had been unable to reach Midgard in time to provide aid. Sarge held the salute as the first metahuman company stood in unmoving formation. In front of them, the flags of New Krypton and America were both at half-mast to show respect to the fallen. The only member of the FMC not standing to attention was Veteran. The 70-year-old soldier sat straight as he could in his wheelchair while Airstrike, Wingman, and 2 other flyers passed overhead in the missing man formation that pilots had used for decades to mark the passing of their own. It did not matter that the 14 were not American. They were soldiers and soldiers knew their own. 14 Kryptonians fewer. Wilson Fisk stated as he watched the ceremony being projected onto the wall of his office. Of course, that still leaves over 40 of them. Yes, sir. Alistair Smythe said as he paged through reports. Given that we now have proof that Kryptonians can be killed, perhaps we could acquire some of the technology that this brainiac utilized. An excellent idea, Smythe. Fisk said jovially. Start making the necessary investments. Of course, sir. I hate funerals. Clark looked round to see a dark-skinned man standing beside him, contemplating the buffet that had been laid out. A moment's thought allowed him to remember his name and where he was assigned. As do I, Rhodey. Clark replied, earning a slight twitch upwards of the corner of James Rhodes' mouth. It never gets easier. I know some people for whom it did. Rhodey replied soberly. They're all people I wish I didn't know. The duo remained silent for a long moment, then Clark glanced round. Is she here? She is. Rhodey said, then he chuckled at how Clark tensed. Don't worry, she's got over her crush on you. Clark sagged slightly in relief, causing Rhodey to chuckle once again. I'm afraid I haven't really been keeping up to date on the other teams. Clark admitted. How are your West Coast Avengers doing? We're doing good. Rhodey replied. Most of the crazies and hard-hitting supervillains tend to head to New York for some reason. We generally get those too stupid to leave, those arrogant enough to try and take us on or, others. Stilt man. Clark grinned, having remembered that particular report and Rhodey winced. Yeah. Him. Hank took him down, but that encounter taught me not to underestimate people. Especially those who have stupid themes. They tend to have at least one nasty trick stored away. I still remember Doreen's squirrel avalanche. Clark admitted. I heard that she once took down Doom with it. Rhodey smirked. You may have to ask Sue Richards about that. Clark supplied. She was part of the operation in question. I've seen the picture. Rhodey laughed. Doreen has it mounted above her mantelpiece. Clark smiled at the comment, then looked around. Zed's authorized Q&A samples from the 14 for use in creating new Kryptonians, although they won't be told of their origins. He stated. He said that although the 14 should live once again, putting that much pressure on a child is a surefire way of causing them to go supervillain. I agree. Rhodey said with feeling. Nothing's guaranteed to cause more problems growing up than unrealistic expectations. Speaking of Kryptonian kids, how are the new generation coming on? All of them are currently well adjusted and making friends at kindergarten. Clark smiled. One or two have been marked as needing extra attention, but it would seem that overall, nurture trumps nature when applied from birth. Given how much power you people have, that's probably wise. Rhodey nodded. I'd hate to think about the amount of damage that a rogue Kryptonian could do. Yeah. Clark winced. Speaking of, if a certain project pans out, I'd recommend that S.H.I.E.L.D. makes as many kryptonite bullets as possible. And red light cages. We may need them. Rhodey stared at him, his face noticeably paling. What project? General? If you could press the button. Tony Stark prompted, and Zed tore his gaze away from the sight of the shrunken city of Kandor floating in the middle of the huge crater that had been excavated for it. Behind him, the first of many food convoys were ready to move in, as well as the team of Kryptonians whose sole mission was to remove the, fortunately automated, gravitonic power station as quickly as possible. Reaching out, Zed paused for a long moment. This will change everything. Meh, lack of change equals boredom. Tony shrugged. Besides, think of how much more Kryptonian tech is in that city, just waiting to be duplicated and enhanced. If you don't push the button, I will. Zed gave the multi-billionaire a wry glare, then gently pressed the big red button. Several dozen miles away, the city of Kandor started to glow as the tech wrapped around it did its job, then it expanded rapidly, pushing the air outwards in a near gale force blast. The city seemed almost insubstantial for a moment, then the buildings solidified as if someone was paint-brushing them from an alternate dimension. Now! A shout echoed and a dozen shapes blurred over the glowing city. An instant later, the shining buildings began to dim as their main power source was forcibly removed and flung into orbit. Get the hypertap into position. Zed ordered over the communicator, and the platform on which they were standing was briefly cast into shadow as two starships passed overhead, a hypertap power generation station slung between them. If you will pardon me, gentlemen, Zed said, then he was gone. Well, that was odd. Tony said, causing Reed Richards, Bruce Banner, and Victor Von Doom to all nod in agreement, Doom stopping the instant he realized he was agreeing with his longtime rival. Ursa Druzid blinked, her hands clutching the railing of her balcony. One moment, the dome had been forming over the city, a protective field that had been conceived by her beloved husband, then the dome had flashed and vanished, leaving the entire landscape around the city changed beyond recognition. A massive explosion sounded, and she leaned across to see the graviton plant that powered the city ripped out of its foundations by an unknown force and hurled up into the skies. A moment later, a new building was lowered into place by a pair of Kryptonian Defense Force starships, but starships that somehow looked slightly off. What happened? She whispered to herself. That is a long story, my beloved. Zed's voice replied, and Ursa's eyes widened in shock as her husband flew down from above to come to a stop in midair barely an arm's length away. Zed. She whispered as the world seemed to whirl away into blackness. Chapter 10, Revelations. What happened? Ursa moaned as she regained consciousness to find herself lying on her sofa. Did I really see Zed flying? Much has changed, my beloved. Zed replied, love suffusing his normally stern voice, and Ursa realized that she was lying with her head on his lap, his fingers gently stroking her hair. For you, it has been barely an hour since we parted, but for me, it has been years, and all because of Brainiac. I don't understand. Ursa admitted as she let Zed help her sit up. What happened? And, you can fly? How? You shall be able to in time, my beloved. Zed said, gently cupping her face in his hand as he looked at her, almost drinking in her appearance. It is perhaps the one thing I can thank that accursed computer for, that he took my plans to preserve as much of Krypton as possible and perverted it, yet in doing so, he kept you safe. Krypton is, no more. Ursa gasped as the implications sank in and Zed nodded. My old friend's predictions were correct. He did not make it. My people and I did only because we were no longer on Krypton when the core imploded. No. Ursa whispered. Jor-El is dead. But his son lives still. Zed stated, a proud smile on his face. Indeed, I call him friend and ally, for it is he that laid the foundations for our race to rise once more, my beloved. Please, trust me. Zed stood and offered his hand to Ursa. When she took it, he scooped her up into a bridal carry and walked out to the balcony. Let me show you what powers our new home has gifted me, and will gift you as well. He said, then he rose into the air, rising high above the city as Ursa clung to him. Zed. She quivered and her husband smiled reassuringly as the city began to flow past beneath them. A moment later, a man who looked heartbreakingly like Jor-El joined them, a red cloak fluttering behind him. Clark. General. The new arrival replied. And I assume that this lovely lady is Ursa. Zed nodded as they descended and Ursa stumbled slightly as she was lowered to the ground, then she blinked in shock at the sight of a blue-skinned woman giving the Jor-El look-alike a deep kiss. My beloved, meet Clark Kent, also known as Kal-El, son of Jor-El, and his wife, Raven Kent. Clark, Raven, this is the one who is the light of my life and the warmth of my soul, Ursa drew Zed. Kal. L. Ursa repeated, staring at Clark. But, you were a baby. You fell asleep in my arms. Should I be jealous? Raven asked, then she grinned. Do you have baby photos? Ursa stared at her for a long moment, then her eyes flicked over to Clark's expression of mingled amusement, embarrassment, and exasperation. I thought you'd already seen the ones Mom showed you. He half complained and Ursa gasped. Lara's alive? Lara Van L. Both Zed and Clark exchanged a long look and Ursa's burst of joy faded. She isn't. She passed away when Krypton exploded. Zed sighed. Clark was referring to the woman who adopted him, Martha Kent, and her husband, Jonathan. After Dad died, Mom moved to the Xavier Institute to help train the new generations of heroes. Clark explained. The students love her, her cooking is amazing. One of the first things my team did was have a Martha-cooked meal together, it really helped to make it into a real team. You know, I think you should take her to meet Mom. Jean can give her English too. English? Ursa repeated curiously. What's that? The third convoy is on its way to Kandor now, the new Kryptonians are, you know, that sentence actually doesn't really work with all of the new Kryptonians, or would they be old Kryptonians, old new Kryptonians? Several members of the Protectors hid their smiles as Clark failed to extricate himself from his convoluted sentence, then T'Challa coughed. So our intervention is probably not required. Not at this time, no. Clark said, shooting him a look of gratitude. Israel and New Olympus have the matter in hand and apparently quite a few of the new arrivals are already moving to New Kryptonopolis, apparently mainly due to the larger apartments. So we can relax for now. Connor smiled, only to freeze as Clark, T'Challa, and Isaiah all glared at him. What? You just invoked Murphy's Law. Betsy sighed as she cradled her head in her hands. Something is going to happen, something bad. That's just superstition. Connor protested. The time has come. Master Mold declared. It is time to initiate the Biosentinels, with the area around Bayville being the first region to be activated. Master Mold, may I be the one to start the operation? Bolivar Trask asked, his expression eager. This is the culmination of all my hopes and plans, the final stage to bring the mutant problem under control. Master Mold stared at her primary agent for a long moment, then slowly nodded. One of the display screens reconfigured to show a large red button on a gray background. "You may initiate the signal, my Prime Sentinel." Bolivar grinned fearfully as he walked over to the screen and lifted one finger. "And thus it begins," he declaimed before tapping the screen, causing the button to flash from red to green. Master Mold turned most of her attention to the activation protocols and tactical feedback, but a tiny portion of her silicon mind pondered on how Trask would react should he discover that the screen in question hadn't actually been a touchscreen and Master Mold had faked the button push in order to allow him to continue to believe wrongly that he was serving her of his own free will. From the doorway, Bastion watched, his face emotionless, and Master Mold diverted another tiny portion of her awareness to monitor him. Although he had been very useful, the chance that he would decide to turn against her and try to seize control himself sometime in the next year or so was a worryingly high 21.513%. The attention she was paying to him would need to be increased. Subtly. The signal was a complex multi-phase energy pulse that was transmitted on the border between realities. The very nature of the signal gave it a range measured in light minutes, while the actual source of the signal was virtually impossible to localize, even by Kryptonian sensors and analysis programs. Despite the complexity of the signal, the actual information that could be carried inside it was minimal due to the requirement for a stable energy matrix for propagation. Any attempt to incorporate more than minimal data would compromise the signal to the point that it would collapse after only a few meters. However, the data that could be carried, properly encoded, was more than enough to deliver the activation signal to specific groups of receivers, each group being defined as being constructed by nanites from the same source. One of the compromised Kryptonian med pods. Despite her best efforts, Master Mold had managed to insert the required programming into less than 1 in 50 of the med pods. Due to the need to generate the required nanites without activating the alert programs, less than 1 in 10 patients for each pod were secretly implanted with the nanites in question, nanites which themselves carried complex programs, including plans for a receiver smaller than the last joint of a small child's little finger. A receiver which had just been activated by the signal, and which had passed the command on to the nanites that had been lying dormant in the flesh of the one they had been placed in. Since no one had detected the signal, there was no warning. Surprise was total. "And she said, that's odd, it didn't do that yesterday." Marcus finished, causing the two of his friends to laugh while the third had the unfortunate timing to be drinking as he said the punchline. The resulting spray of soda was quite impressive and only added to the hilarity of the moment. "Damn it, Marcus, how do you know jokes like these?" Simon asked as he used his mutant power over liquids to clean the soda out of his clothes. Then at William's nod, he pulled the soda out of William's clothing too, leaving it dry. The collected liquid flowed through the air to the nearby drain, where it poured itself away. "Family reunions." Marcus grinned. "My uncle's in the Navy and he work." Marcus suddenly stiffened, his skin going pale, then he fell over, convulsing. "Get help!" Simon shouted and William dropped his cup as he sprinted back into the cafe to alert the staff. "Marcus! What's happening?" Marcus screamed as his skin took on a silvery hue, then red panels seemed to ooze out of his skin, forming a combined collar and shoulder armor. The rest of his body turned metallic blue, shifting in ways that shredded his clothing, then he stood. "Marcus?" Simon asked nervously, looking at the thing that had less than a minute ago been his friend. "Mutant detected," the being stated in a gravelly voice totally unlike Marcus' slow accent. "Primary mission engaged." The being's right hand clenched, then fragments of Simon's skull went flying as the being's fist ended his life. "Mutant deceased. Scanning for additional targets," the being stated, turning to the cafe where the owner was in the door, frozen with horror. "Additional targets located. Commencing termination protocols." The cafe owner, whose mutant power was that he was heat-proof, died half a second later. X-gene detected. Commencing neutralization. The frantic mother tried to hit the blue and red being reaching for her baby, but she was picked up in one hand and thrown across the mall. The being then started to reach into the pram for the sleeping child, only to be tackled by a pair of security guards. Warning. Any further attempt to prevent the purification of humanity will result in your termination. Do not interfere. The larger guard moved to put the attacker into a headlock, only for the being to reach out and punch into his chest, pulling out his still beating heart. Obstacle 1, terminated. A gunshot rang out and the sentinel turned to face the younger security guard, the bullet that had been fired at it landing on the floor. Hostile activity confirmed. You are now a designated hostile and will be terminated. A second blue and red being landed behind the guard and grabbed him, twisting his head so that his neck snapped. The first being rose into the air and flew after the fleeing mother, ignoring the screaming crowd trying to escape. Place the mutant on the ground and move away from it. All mutants must be terminated. The school fire alarm triggered even as the first screaming students flooded out of the school, some of them with blood splatters on their clothing. One student was halfway through the door when a force blast from behind caught him in the lower back, flinging him forwards with an impact that snapped his spine. Damn it! Hank McCoy swore as he tackled the being that had once been a student, wrestling it so that its hands no longer pointed at the flood of students trying to escape the war zone that minutes earlier had been a peaceful school. What the hell are you? Mutant detected. The being said, its glowing red eyes locking onto the PE teacher. Termination protocols initiated. Hank growled as he threw his not inconsiderable strength into preventing his adversary's hands from getting into a position where they could unleash one of the lethal blasts, but he could feel his strength beginning to wane as something sapped it in a manner not too dissimilar, albeit slower, to a power neutralizer band. The being managed to force a hand into position and Hank stared at the gathering glow, then the thing shuddered and collapsed. What the hell is that thing? Ray Carter asked, his hands crackling with electricity. When I hit it with a stun discharge, it barely twitched. I had to zap its spine to take it down. Someone help. A scream echoed as a wall exploded outwards. Ray and Hank didn't even pause as they sprinted towards the new threat, electricity wreathing around Ray's hands. Emergency on Earth. All heroes to Earth immediately. The siren and announcement cut through the moon base and Connor stared in shock at the speaker unit. It's not my fault. He protested before sprinting to the deployment room. Check the description for the links to the author.